I am recording. Welcome to our, what installment is this one? Fourth? Our
Yes.
fourth installment of Witch by Eva Ibbotson.
Mm-hmm.
I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly. But this has been a wild ride with the witches. They are vying for the heart of Ariman the Awful. Ariman the Awful is looking for a
Mm-hmm.
wife. As he called them, the old hags. He is, he is against his wishes looking for a wife to carry on his name, and he is going to continue to do that by trying to find the witch who has the blackest magic. These chapters are going, oh, I'm sorry, the darkest magic. These chapters are going to get darker and darker with the magic.
Ooh.
Yeah, so very interesting book. It's a good book.
Yeah.
I like where the story is going.
It's
And
getting
so
ominous and spooky.
yeah, lot, but it's very graphic in
I
some
mean, we did
instances.
turn someone into a tree. So
Pardon?
Yes.
I said we did turn someone into a tree.
Yes.
We
It,
put people in a tree.
yeah.
And we
Capture their
did put
spirit.
people into a tree.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And
So,
summoned a kraken.
A
hmm
baby kraken. He is very
Yes.
cute.
Cute little baby
Daddy?
kraken.
What do you say, Daddy?
Yes. Squidward.
Mm.
So it's just going to be the three of us tonight. So
Okay.
we're gonna make this happen, and we're going to read to chapter 14, or whatever comes first,
Ambitious.
the
All
hour.
right. Well, let's get to it then.
Yeah. So I mean, if we don't make it to chapter 14, that's fine tonight, but
All right.
I'm hoping we do. So
All right.
anyway, who wants to go? Well, you know what? I'm gonna go first tonight.
Fair enough.
I like it. I like
Yep.
it.
All right. Um,
Who goes second?
Melanie.
Sure.
All right. And then I'll go third.
And you are turd. Okay.
You mean I'm trade? I'm not turd. I got that. I heard that. I'm watching you.
That's my joke for tonight. Thank
Uh-huh.
you.
Uh-huh. You're
Ah,
too
But
crazy.
chink.
mm-mm.
Which please.
Yeah. But we shall start on chapter 10, page 125. For those of you who have books, for those of you who have Kindles or the library version, it is chapter 10. And I can't tell you what page that on because I don't think they have pages. So, whenever I'm ready, whenever we're ready, I will
Yes,
begin. And
we
here
are
we
ready.
go. Chapter 10. No one ever forgot what happened when witch number 3 did her trick. It was really very horrible in a way that no one could have imagined. And even Araman, used as he was to terror and disaster, could never think of it in years to come without feeling quite giddy and faint. Witch number 3 was Nancy Shouter, and when she announced her trick, there was a great deal of interest. I am going, she said, to make a bottomless hole. To make a bottomless hole is not easy. A bottomless hole is not a hole that comes out in Australia. A hole that comes out in Australia is a hole that comes out in Australia. It is not bottomless. No. Bottomless is something very different. Bottomless is a mysterious,
Nothingness that goes on forever. It is interminable. It is interminable blackness. It is no echo, no plop when something drops into it, no glimmer of water in its steps. Not only that, a bottomless hole has a demonic and unusual power. Anyone coming too close has to almost uncontrollably, longingly throw himself into it. Everyone, therefore, was pleased, and Mr. Chatterjee, becoming muddled in his excitement, said, "Oh, that is good. A bottom with no hole." So Nancy got to work. She had chosen the east lawn, quite close to the house, to do her trick, and she went about it in a businesslike manner, stubbing out her cigarette, putting her chicken down on the bonnet of the caterpillar tractor that Mr. Ledbetter had hired for her, and setting the motor to motion so that the heavy rotary blades could dig into the soil. It was a mild and pleasant day. The other witches had clustered in the little summer house, where they could see without being seen by Ariman. Even Madame Olympia had turned out with her aardvark. At the judges' table, which Lester had raised on a wooden block so that they could see the digging better, Ariman tried to forget the awful night he had spent with the Kraken and his anxiety about the wizard watcher, who was sending brave but homesick postcards from places like Brighton and Southern on the Sea, and prepared to give the witch number 3 a chance.
Okay.
Nancy seems to know her job, true. Her chicken was against her. Is that right? Yeah, Nancy seemed to know her job. True, her chicken was against her. All along, the Shouter chickens had been rather a washout as familiars. They never crowed thrice, or flapped threateningly, or erected their wattles, and altogether, they looked more like old-age pensioners evicted from a battery than the kind of bird one finds in fairy stories or in fights. All the same, Nancy was doing all right. From working with the railway, both the Shouter twins were good with mechanical things. And after about an hour, Nancy drove the tractor away to the other side of the lawn, and the real task began. Because, of course, at this stage, the thing was simply a hole. Nancy had dug up some old drain pipes, part of a tin bath, an old ham bone of the wizard watchers, and masses of shale and sludge. She had made a deep hole, a good hole, the kind of hole little boys stand and gape at on the way to school. But though its bottom was a long way down, it was still there. But now the magic began. First, Nancy circled the hole with her wand, scratching a witch's pentacle deep into the surrounding soil. 5 times she walked widdershins round the hole, and 5 times she walked not widdershins, keeping always to the far side of the magic symbol. Then she put down her wand, picked up her chicken, and raising it aloft, turned to the north. Spirits of the earth.
Of the earth. I bid thee suck the bottom from this hole. She groaned. Then, still holding her chicken, she turned to the west. Spirits of fire, I bid thee burn the bottom from this hole, cried Nancy Shouter. Then she turned to the east and bade the spirits of the air blow the bottom from the hole. But now the chicken had had enough. Barking from her arms, and it was chickenless that Nancy turned to the south and commanded the spirits of the water to drown the bottom of the hole. After which she said, it is always hard, the bit between the end of a piece of magic and the time when it is supposed to work. No one is good at waiting, and witches least of all. Nancy had begun the most terrifying thing. Nancy had begun, had begun the most irritably to tap her toes when the scream began. That just no one could imagine. A scream as if a million giants had been disemboweled with red-hot pincers. A scream that grew louder and more unaudible each second till everyone... Their skulls must shatter with the pain of it. And how could it be otherwise? For this was the...
That's a scream from hell. You gotta turn that down. That just blew my ears out.
I'm so sorry.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. That was terrifying.
Yeah, because this was the scream of a hole losing the only thing that it has, its bottom. When the noise had died away, at last, the pain in their ear had gone. The judges walked over to where Nancy stood, taking care not to go too close because of the fearsome power of a bottomless hole has to draw things into it. They examined, discussed, and considered, and they were pleased. Ariman was nodding. Mr. Chatterjee, in his bright turban, was bobbing up and down, and the white, exhausted face of the old ghoul had cracked into something almost like a smile. For while it was true that there was not much you can actually do with a bottomless hole, at least it cannot possibly turn out to be someone's aunt, like the mermaids. Nor can it make somebody happy, as Mr. Bicknell had been made happy by being shut in the tree. As they returned to the table, it was clear that the judges were going to give Nancy a much higher mark than they had awarded Ethel Feedbag or Mabel Rack. But before they could make an announcement, there was a scuffle from the summer house. Belladonna cried, "Oh, please don't!" And when Nora Scooter shaked herself loose, catapulting into the east lawn, brandishing her chicken as she came.
Okay.
"You're a cheat!" she screamed, charging up to her twin. "You're a liar and a twister and a cheat. That's my chicken you've got there. You've done your trick with my chicken, so it doesn't count. I have not done my trick with your chicken. I have done my trick with my chicken. You haven't. You have." Face to face on the east lawn, the Shouter sisters' fury and loathing reached new heights. "And anyway," yelled Nora, "I don't believe your hole is bottomless. It's just a hole. My hole is so bottomless." "No, it isn't." "Yes, it is." Ariman had risen from his seat, his devilish eyebrows meeting in an angry frown, and in the summer house, Belladonna had covered her face. But nothing could stop the Shouters now. Both had put down their chickens and stood facing each other with murder in their eyes. "You say my hole isn't bottomless once more, I'll finish you, you worm-eating jerk!" screamed Nancy, forgetting the contest, forgetting everything. "It isn't bottomless! It isn't bottomless! It isn't bottomless!" screeched Nora, quite eaten up with jealousy and temper.
Okay. What happened next? Happened with terrifying speed. Nancy pushed forward and pushed her sister hard, sending her reeling to fall backward with her knives in the air. Then, as Nora tried to rise, Nancy pushed her again and she fell, this time inside the magic pentacle. Even then, Nancy might have saved her twin, but she stood there unmoving, her face suffused with an evil gloating triumph as Nora half rose, swayed, and tottered of her own accord toward the round black maw. Right at the edge, she managed to pause and tried desperately to take a step backward. Too late! There was a hideous roaring, sucking noise. Nora's arm went up. The hole took her. The campsite that night was silent as the grave. Ariman, white with shock, had disqualified witch number 3 and ordered the east lawn to be cleared. Nancy, though, had hardly seemed to hear what he said, but just stood there, blindly gazing at the spot where her sister had last stood. And in the end, it was Belladonna who led her away and put her to bed in the tent she had shared with Nora. "Doesn't matter which of our chickens is which now, does it?" was all Nancy said as Belladonna settled the sad brown birds into their coop. Okay.
And Belladonna, who knew perfectly well which chicken was which, and always had, agreed that it didn't matter now. It didn't matter at all. The horribleness of what had happened kept everyone in a state of shock throughout the following day, which was the one on which Nora should have done her act. Mr. Chatterjee stayed curled in his bottle like a baby that doesn't want to be born. Ariman didn't even notice when the Kraken dribbled on his best elastic-sided boots. And at the campsite, the witches stopped bickering for once, shamed by the tragedy that had overtaken them. But the strangest thing of all was what had happened to Nancy. Nancy had turned overnight from a foul-mouthed, bossy, chain-smoking witch into a timid, shrunken person who just laid on her camp bed in her vest and knickers, refusing to wash or dress or eat, and telling anyone who came near that it didn't matter which chicken was which. She's going off her nut. You mark my words, said Mother Bloodworth. I've seen it before. She's flipped. Terence couldn't understand it. She hated Nora so much, didn't she, Belladonna? Why is she so upset? Belladonna crinkled her forehead, trying to work it out. I suppose hating Nora was sort of part of.
Okay.
Nancy. I mean, it was what being Nancy was about. And now Nora's gone, she isn't anybody. Just a wraith. But however worried they were about Nancy, the contest had to go on. So later that afternoon, Terence and Belladonna set off for the woods behind the campsite and practiced with Rover, turning the golden bracken fronds into leprous fingers and conjuring little spitting dragons from a bramble bush. They had discovered that Rover's power was so strong that it could work from inside the matchbox even when Terence held it closed. And this was a great help, because with the box open, Rover had wandered about rather a lot. He was named Rover, after all. Funny, I thought I heard someone moving over there, behind those elms, said Belladonna, as they sat resting in a grassy clearing, letting Rover crawl confidingly across their hands. They peered through the trees, but there was no one there. Yet both of them had had an eerie feeling of being watched, and by someone far more sinister than lumbering Ethel or fishy Mabel Rack. Perhaps we'd better put him away, said Terence, scooping Rover back into his box. They had kept his incredible power secret from the other witches, and they meant to go on doing so. And if they could not see the cunning enchantress loping away from the clearing, who could blame them? She had taken on a form much used by witches, that of a fleet and silent hare. But no real hare ever had in its eyes the look that was in this one's, evil and calculating and unutterably cruel.
Okay. Chapter 11. The following day, it was Mother Bloodworth's turn. She had spent the whole of the evening before in a last desperate attempt at the turning herself young again spell, rushing from her tent to the toilet block and back again with little jars of crushed gallbladder from the inside of murderers, powdered mandrake picked under a dying moon, and a whole lot of other nauseous things which she rubbed into herself.
I said, man. I said, man.
Croaking weird rhymes as she did so. I said, man. But it hadn't helped, as she was announced by Mr. Ledbetter and tottered out into the Italian garden. She was unmistakably Mother Bloodworth. Warts, whiskers, cloud of flies, and all. Ariman, of course, recognized her at once, but to the surprise of Mr. Ledbetter and the ogre, he did not try to escape. The reason for this was simple. He
He had decided that if the witch with the whiskers won the contest, he, Ariman the Awful would kill himself. He would do this in some very dramatic way, perhaps by plunging over the cliff into the boiling waters of the Devil Cauldron, or by shooting himself with a silver dueling pistol, or by falling onto one of the swords that Lester was always swallowing. But he would do it. So he was quite calm as the witch number 5 hobbled toward him and handed her list. He stayed calm until he read it. It was Mother Bloodworth who wanted the 7 princesses. She was going to do an old-fashioned trick, but a very famous one. The one in which 7 beautiful maidens of a blood royal turned into 7 black swans, doomed to wing their way across the waters of the world through all eternity. There is probably nothing sadder or more romantic in all magic than this spell. One minute you have these lively, bright-eyed girls with all life before them, and often a prince or two in the offing. And then there comes this ghastly moment when their golden hair turns into black down, their rosebud mouths become beaks, their pretty feet into silver slippers change into webbed toes, until at last the great black tragic birds fly away into the sunset, never to return. As a setting for this trick, Mother Bloodworth had chosen the Italian garden, which lay beside the lake.
Okay.
Ariman hadn't got round to much blighting and smiting there, and it was a beautiful spot, with urns, statues, and wide gravelled paths which swept down to the shimmering water. But now the great magician had read her list. 7 princesses? He roared. 7? You must be mad! Mother Bloodwort, however, was not to be put off. 7 proper ones, royal. I can't just whirl princesses through the air like commoners, you know, said Ariman. The thing has to be done properly. Decent transport and all that. And they're not in the telephone directory. But Mother Bloodwort, obstinate old witch that she was, just stood there, waiting.
Oh.
Ariman sighed. Tell everyone to go away for an hour, Ledbetter, he said. I'll have to go to my laboratory for this. And send me that nephew of yours. He's a useful lad, and I could do with an extra pair of hands. So Mr. Ledbetter took the witches back to the camp, and Terence, beaming with pride, followed Ariman and the ogre into the laboratory with its bubbling crucibles and fiendish flasks. Actually, there is a sort of telephone directory for princesses, said the magician. It's called the Almanach de Gotha. Run and get it from the library, boy. It's a big gold-bound book on the second shelf.
As you go in, Terence was back in no time, his eyes shining with excitement. Let's see. There's a Spanish family descended from Carlos de Flor, I believe. Yes. I'm sorry. Wait a second. There's a Spanish family descended from Carlos the Cruel, I believe. Yes, who offered that? There seems to be a daughter, and we ought to find something in Austria. What about the Habsburg? They're simply royal enough. Can't we have a British princess? Said Lester. Ariman shook his head. Not wise, I think. The barrel a bit. Still, let's get to work. For nearly an hour, Ariman magicked, murmuring spells, twirling his wand, going backward and forward between his potion and his vellum-bound books. Once he said, "Language, I feel an unusual force in this." exchanged a look with Lester and said nothing. Grover was in his pocket, but if Belladonna was to win the contest, the worm's special power had to be activated. Right, said the magician. You can fetch them all back now. The last one's just come through. Because sure enough, they are rather beautifully arranged round the rim of the fountain were 7 princesses. Ariman had kept his word, and all of them were of the blood royal. That was as far as he'd been.
Well, to go. It was no use pretending that they were a matching set of lovely girls. The Princess Olga Zerjinsky, for example, a niece of one of the last Grand Dukes of Russia, was 92 and crippled with rheumatism, so that Ariman had to conjure her up from a wheelchair. On the other hand, an African princess descended from King Solomon himself was, though beautifully dressed in couture, unfortunately had a wooden leg. And the Indian princess was almost invisible in a cloud of exhaust from her motorcycle. There was another young princess from America wearing Levi's and a t-shirt embroidered with "I am Batman's friend." Her ancestors had left France when Louis Philippe lost his throne. And there was a middle-aged Austrian one whose nose came down over her chin because she was a Habsburg, and they have been famous through history for being the ugliest rulers in the world. There was an Eastern princess in silken trousers who had Mr. Chatterjee swooning out of his bottle with excitement. Mother Bloodworth, meanwhile, had announced her trick. "I'm going to turn princesses of the blood royal into black swans," she said. Then, feeling perhaps that something was missing, she said, "Tee," which was the nearest she could to an evil cackle laughter.
Okay.
She then vanished behind a statue of the god Pan and returned with a broomstick. It was the crummiest, most moth-eaten broomstick anyone had ever seen. Mother Bloodwort had made it herself from brushwood she had found at the back of the camping site. But everyone was pleased because it meant she was going to do hobby horse magic. This is the kind where you ride round and round your victims, going faster and ever faster, dizzying them with your speed and your spells until the transformation is complete. It's old-fashioned magic, but it can be very powerful. So now, Mother Bloodwort went over to the fountain, blew a hole in her cloud of flies, and stood peering at the princesses. Then she laid her wrinkled hand on the Spanish one in her lace mantilla and turquoise gown. "You!" she said, pulling her forward onto the graveled path. Ariman had hypnotized the princesses as they came, so that the dark-eyed Princess Juanita followed the old crone obediently, her wooden leg clacking a little as she walked. Mother Bloodwort now mounted her broomstick, groaning as she heaved her stiff old legs over the handle.
Okay, which she had greased with the melted body fat of maddened skunks, and began to ride around and around the Spanish lady. Oil attack away, ye magic broom! Send this princess to her doom! Shrieked Mother Bloodworth. Faster she rode, and faster, sending her a hood tumbling back and her white hair streaming, while her cloud of flies clung desperately to her flushed face and heaved chest. So exhausted and old that no one really expected the magic to work, but they were wrong. Strange and terrible things were happening to Princess Juanita. Her hair had wavered, vanished. Her head was shimmering, and now it was covered in feathers, and her full pouting mouth was changing. Yes, changing into a beak. "She's done it, Terence! She's done it, Terence! Mother Bloodworth's done it!" cried Belladonna joyfully from the pavilion. Once more, Mother Bloodwort circled the doomed princess, then she dismounted and stood back. "Drat!" said Mother Bloodwort. For while it was true that she had completely transformed,
the princess into a bird, that bird was not a swan. It was a duck. And the princess, having had trouble with her leg, was a lame duck. Everybody stared gloomily at the enchanted bird as it waddled and quacked toward the water. Why there is such a difference between a duck and a swan, it is hard to say. There just is. This one seemed to be a kayak Campbell, and not to be at all the sort of people that a prince might fall in love with, recognizing it for the imprisoned soul it was. But Mother Bloodworth was not daunted. Leaving the duck to stare moodily at a clump of reeds, she took her broomstick back to the fountain and led out the Eastern princess, lovingly as an orchid in her shimmering trousers and golden blouse. "Why?" moaned Mr. Chatterjee. He had never married, not being sure if his wife would settle in a bottle, and the Princess Sherry was all he had desired. Again, the princess followed the old witch meekly. Again, Mother Bloodworth rode around and around her on the broomstick, reciting her rhyme. "It's going to work this time," whispered Belladonna to Terence. "Look, the feathers are black. It's a lovely swan, you'll see." They watched, breathless, as Mother Bloodworth slowed down and dismounted.
Okay.
"I see that I am to be spared nothing," muttered Ariman the Awful, while beside him. Mr. Chatterjee howled with pain. For the bird, now tottering like an overfed alderman towards the lake, was a fat, sleek, and foolish-looking penguin. For a moment, Mother Bloodwort was very much put out, but once more she pulled herself together and, coughing up a number of dead flies, she regreased her broomstick and went to fetch the German princess with her flaxen pigtails and her dirndl. But the Princess Waltraud Hohenstaufen did not seem to be as hypnotized as the others. "It is disgusting," she hissed. "We are being made stocking laughs of. Me, I will be a black swan, or I will write to the newspapers." But it was not to be. And of all the heart-rending things they'd had to watch, one of the worst was seeing a great-great-great-granddaughter of Attila the Hun sitting on a branch and saying in that silly way that parakeets have, even in Germany, "Please, Walty, a biscuit? A biscuit, give quickly to Walty, please." It was Belladonna who knew what was going to happen next. Mother Bloodwort had dropped her broom, her shoulders sagged, her cloud of flies grew silent. "Don't!" cried Belladonna. "Oh, please, Mother Bloodwort, don't!" Too late. Already, the parakeet, looking surprised, had hopped onto the thing that now stood foursquare upon the path beside the lake. The ghoul woke and said, "Vomit!" Mr. Chatterjee shook his turbaned head sadly from side to side, and Ariman the Awful rose from his seat. "No one," he said, "can accuse me of not doing my bit for wizardry and darkness. But there is one thing I will not do, and that is marry a coffee table." And pulling his mantle close about him, the outraged wizard strode away.
Chapter 12. On the night before Madame Olympia was due to do her trick, Terence had a dream. Not a dream, really, a nightmare, a truly horrible one, in which he was back at the Sunnydend home with all the miseries and cruelties he knew so well. In his dream, Terence was looking for something terribly important, but he didn't know what it was. And going more and more. I'm sorry, you guys. I lost my place.
and growing more and more frantic.
Yeah, so
He was in his dream looking for something.
Yes. Okay. In history, Terrence was looking for something terribly important, but he didn't know what it was. And growing more and more frantic, he ran through the drab, cold room, opening battered locker doors, tearing the lids off serving dishes with his soggy dumplings and clammy meatballs, snatching the rough gray blankets from the iron beds, and all the time, as he searched, he heard the sound of laughter, jeering, taunting laughter, unable to bear. Terrence ran down the long steps to the garden.
Find it, said Terrence. I'll find it here. He bent down and pressed his hands against the gravel, but the laughter was growing louder and louder, more malevolent. And then, suddenly, rearing up in his path was the dreaded figure of the matron with her jeering lips and baleful eyes. Matron, growing 10 feet tall and still trailing the roots which had tethered her. Roots which he saw were now made of plaited, blood-stained human teeth. I must find it, sobbed the little boy. You'll never find it. You'll never find it, screamed Matron. And as her pointed shoe, sharpened to a saw blade, came up to cut him in half, Terrence woke. At first, just finding that he was in his little room at the hall, wearing Mr. Ledbetter's pajama top and miles away from Matron, was a tremendous relief. But this dream was one it didn't seem to shake off. What had he been looking for so desperately? What had Matron said he'd never find? And suddenly awake, Terrence knew what he had not known when he was sleeping. Rover. It was Rover he'd been looking for. Only that was silly. Rover was safe in his box. Terrence had said goodnight to him only hours ago, and he'd been in splendid shape, rippling along the rim of the waistband like an anaconda.
Okay.
Still, he'd just make absolutely sure. Jumping out of bed, Terrence turned on the light and went over to Rover's box, which stood where it always stood, under the window. He lifted the lid. "Rover?" he called. The worm was underground. He usually was, and turning the moist, crumbly earth over with his hands, Terrence began to search for his friend. He was a long way down tonight, a very long way down. And gradually, as he searched, Terrence's movements became faster, and his breath seemed to stick in his throat. Even then, he didn't panic, but went to fetch a newspaper from the pantry and, spreading the sheets out on the floor, upended Rover's box. In the thinly spread scattering of earth, the truth could no longer be denied. Rover was gone. An hour later, the ogre, the secretary, and Terrence were in Mr. Ledbetter's room, desperately deciding what to do. The ogre had rubbed his eye patch onto the back of his head. Mr. Ledbetter was pacing the floor, and Terrence, still in the secretary's pajama top, was crouched on the bed like a worried fledgling on a nest. "I suppose it wouldn't be possible to use another earthworm for the competition?"
"The competition," said Mr. Ledbetter. Terrence shook his head. "Belladonna said she tried being black sometimes with other worms when I was up at the hall, and it didn't work at all. Any worm that makes her black, it's Rover. What if we got another worm and told her it was Rover?" began Mr. Ledbetter, and broke off because he knew he was being silly. Belladonna could tell each ladybird from all its fellows, call a dozen grimy sparrows, rooftop by their age. It was as foolish to think that all dogs looked alike as it was to imagine that she couldn't tell Rover from every earthworm in the world. It's only Friday, said Terence in a rather shaky voice. To him, Rover had not been just a powerful familiar. Terence had lost a dear and valued friend. It's Madame Olympia's turn tomorrow, and Sunday's a free day, isn't it? So by the time Belladonna does her trick on Monday night, don't you think Rover might be... He gulped and pulled himself together. Might be found? The ogre and Mr. Ledbetter exchanged glances. Terence believed that Rover was simply lost, and they thought it was better he went on thinking so. They had their own suspicions, but the boy had quite enough to bear. Okay.
Come on it, son, said Lester, laying his enormous hand on Terence's shoulder. I suppose we'll just have to give up all hope of Belladonna winning, said the secretary wearily. No! Terence had jumped from the bed, and his voice was strong again. No! We mustn't give in! Look! Belladonna's just got to win! The actual competition, hasn't she? I mean, once Ariman's seen her, he's bound to want to marry her, and by the time maybe Rover will have turned up. So can't we fake her trick? Pretend that she's raised Sir Simon? Get someone to impersonate the ghost, do you mean? That's right, said Terence eagerly. There could be lots of smoke and spotlights and things, like in the pantomime. And then this horrible spectre suddenly appears alive. Mr. Ledbetter looked shocked. That would be cheating, surely. Terence turned to him surprised. Well, cheating's black, isn't it? The blackest is what Ariman wants. Mr. Ledbetter saw the logic of this. But who could we get to take part of Sir Simon?
I love it.
Be a professional, said Lester. An actor. I used to know some when I was in the fair, but not now. Wait a minute, said Mr. Ledbetter. Now that he...
Okay.
Had got used to the idea of cheating, his brain was beginning to tick over once again. You know my sister Amelia, the one that's Terence's mother and didn't marry the swimming bath attendant? The others nodded. Well, she keeps a boarding house for theatricals in Toadcaster. You know, actors and people connected with the stage generally. I wonder if she could find us someone to impersonate Sir Simon. We'll have to move fast, said Lester. There's only 2 days and one of them's a Sunday. And I don't really see how I can leave the old man with that Madame Olympia due to do her trick tomorrow. I can't either, said Mr. Ledbetter. That's for some most complicated stuff. Strobe lights and amplifiers and goodness knows what. Oh, dear. I can go, said Terence. There was a pause. Terence had looked wonderfully better since he'd come to the hall, but he was still the smallest and skinniest boy imaginable, and Toadcaster was 30 miles away. It meant a train and then a bus into the town. Amelia'd look after you, said Mr. Ledbetter slowly, but... His voice trailed away. He was too polite to say that he didn't think an actor or anyone else would take much notice of Terence. Wait a minute, said the ogre. I've got an idea.
Okay. The old man's been making paper money. 5 is 10 is the law. As he's sick of humping bagged all round, just I would have a look. He was back in a few minutes with a large wallet crammed to bursting with notes. If you take these, you'll be all right, said Lester. No one will care stuff what size you are when they see these. And remember, not a word to Belladonna. She's got to believe that she's really raising Sir Simon, and that it's Rover she's touching inside his box. However nutty she is on Ariman, she'll never cheat to get him, and that's for sure. And then at last they went to bed to wait for dawn. But one light still burnt at Darlington. A single lamp in the window of Madame Olympia's caravan, where the enchantress sat gloating over something she held in her cruel, rapacious fingers. Something moist and gentle, which, greedy as she was, beyond any jewel. She had always been certain she would win the contest, but now, no one could beat her now.
Chapter 13. Belladonna woke on the morning of Madame Olympia's trick, feeling worried and out of sorts. The bloodshot eyeballs on her sleeping bag had gone very pink and fragrant in the night, and she had a nasty feeling that they might be turning into a begonias she was so often troubled with. Then there was Mother Bloodworth, who had been so upset by the Badginger that not all Belladonna's coaxing could get her to remember the undoing spell for being a coffee table. And Belladonna had had to drag her into her own tent, and just hope she'd come around in time. And being Belladonna, she had worried about the flies. Were they all right inside the coffee table? What did they think? But of course, she cooked breakfast for the others.
And took a cup of tea to Nancy Shouter, who still lay on her camp bed in her vest and knickers, telling everyone that it didn't matter which chicken was which. And then she followed Mabel Rack and Ethel Feedbag up to the hall. When she reached the steps leading to South Terrace, she met Mr. Ledbetter and the ogre, who told her that Terence had gone into Toadcaster to do some errands for Ariman. "Oh dear," said Belladonna, "he'll miss Madame Olympia's trick, and he's so fond of magic." Feeling ridiculously miserable at the thought of spending the day without the little boy, she went to look for the other witches and find a hiding place from which to watch. Madame Olympia had chosen to do her trick in the underground vaults and cellars of Darkington Hall itself, a dark, echoing warren of passages which opened into a wide cave, as big as several rooms, where in the olden days prisoners had been tortured to death or left to starve. No daylight ever reached this subterranean maze, and as Ariman strode to his place at the judge's table, holding the genie's bottle under his cloak against the cold, he shivered and pulled his collar round his ears. But when witch number 6 strode into the cave...
Okay, changed. For here at last was a witch to be taken seriously. One moment they were sitting in a dark and gloomy cellar. The next, the cave was aflame with flashing lights that changed from sulphurous yellow to livid green and searing crimson, casting strange and flickering shadows on the wall. Next, the vault was filled with...
Hey, everybody! Are you ready to
As the music of the groaning gizzards, I lost my voice, amplified to screaming pitch, pierced the eardrums of the listener with a song about greed and wretchedness and hate. Having thus set the stage, the enchantress walked over to the judge's table and bowed low. She was wearing the hood and gown that Ariman had insisted on, but she did not look like all the other. She did not at all look like Mother Bloodworth or Eva Ibbotson or Mabel Rack. In the secrecy of her caravan, the enchantress had sewn 1,000 jet black sequins onto her gown, which now trembled and glittered in the light of the rose, as if the rhinestones on the collar and lid of her sinister familiar. Witch number 6 was tall and carried herself like a queen, and she had looped her necklace of 93 molars, 57 incisors, and 11 wisdom teeth that was to make a column of palest ivory round her throat. A symphony of dust, performed by a cast of 1,000, announced Madame Olympia. Okay.
nodded. He didn't understand a word, but it sounded good. And the witch's low, husky voice sent a most agreeable shiver up his spine. Madame Olympia stepped into the center of the cave. Then she closed her eyes and raised not her wand, but a whip. A whip like no other in the world. Stolen from an accursed Egyptian tomb, its thongs were made of a plaited skin of human slaves. The lazuli handle had been wrought by an ancient sorcerer so powerful that it had meant death even to know his name. 3 times Madame Olympia laid the whip across the back of the aardvark, charging it with the evil beast's devilish power. Then she cracked the whip, and everybody gasped. A minute before, the cellar had been empty. Now, from every nook and cranny, from the walls, the ceiling, the floors, from the very air itself, there came tumbling and squealing and clawing, and hundreds, 200, 500, 1,000 huge gray rats. Not ordinary rats. Swollen, putrid-eyed rats with sacrilege tails, bloated fleas clinging to their matted fur, rats with death in their filthy eyes, vicious, matted, plague-bearing rats. Belladonna, hiding behind the pillar, gasped with terror, turning to take Terrence's hand and remembering that he was not there. The ogre said, "Oh!"
Go ahead, Bob.
And Ariman The Awful leaned forward intently in his seat. There were so many rats now that they could not all put their diseased and twisted feet on the ground, but walked on each other's faces, climbed on each other's backs. And now Madame Olympia turned off the music of the groaning gizzards and adjusted the amplifier so that it was the squeaks and squeals and hideous scamperings of the rats, magnified beyond bearing, filled the cave. Once more, she flicked her whip, and now, unbelievably, one of the deformed and frightful animals swelled and swelled, grew to twice its size, 3 times. Rats the size of large dogs now, so that the beast's heavy, scaly tails thumped like hawsers against the stones, and the fleas, those dreaded carriers of bubonic plague, fell off them, large as saucers. Smiling her cruel, complacent smile, the enchantress watched as the sickening monsters in their thousands filled the cave, pressing each other against the walls, stamping each other underfoot, their whiskers flicking like thongs into the oozing eyes and twitching limbs of their fellows. And still more rats appeared, layer upon layer of them, till the cave was filled almost to the roof with the misshapen, screeching monsters.
Go ahead, Melanie.
Only the ghouls were smiling now, the ogre, though the bravest of men had pulled Mr. Ledbetter away to stand behind Ariman, and the 3 witches, their differences forgotten, clung together, trembling. Again, the enchantress cracked her whip, and they saw that Madame Olympia had not come to the end of her devilry. For even as they watched, the flesh, the hair, the eyes, and the skin of the giant rats began to pucker up, to shrivel, and then to vanish altogether, till the whole cellar was packed with skeletons. But skeletons which still ran and climbed and fought and bit. Eyeless, hairless, tailless. These were still rats, and on the walls their shadows reared and capered in the grotesque and frightening dance of death. "Is good, is very good," said Mr. Chatterjee inside his bottle, but he was shaking like a leaf. And Belladonna, almost fainting with disgust. But he's glad that at least Terrence was not here. Another crack of the whip, and lo, the giant rats were clothed in their own flesh again. Their gray fur returned, their rheumy eyes, their scabrous tails. But the most horrible part of the trick was still to come. For as they heard the last crack of the whip, all the rats were seized at the same moment with a passionate and uncontrollable desire for the taste of each other's flesh.
That's gross.
It was cannibalism run riot. Cannibalism in the most ghastly form, as the rats sank their yellow teeth into thighs and shoulders and cheeks.
Okay. And slowly devour each
Oh,
That's so gross. It's so gross. The sounds are so hard. Oh, the sounds are so. Ugh. Ugh. Ugh.
Gross.
Oh, this is gross.
I told you.
Yeah.
I told you.
Yeah, but you know this got me. I
Yeah,
can't do
you knew
rats.
this was coming. You were prepared. We were not.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So, and I
For
told you guys.
You
I
did.
told-
You
my
did. You gave us
God.
fair warning. You did give us fair
Oh
warning.
my God.
Okay.
Not like this. Oh my gosh.
Belladonna beneath her breath. There were fewer rats now and fewer, as more and more twitching bodies vanished into the maws of their fellows. Soon, only 50 rats were left, then 20, then 5, and then 1. A single rat sitting on the in the middle of the floor. But from a wound in its side, and the twitching tail of Aver vanished. Even then, it was not quite done, for now this last rat was seized with the most terrible madness of all. Ghastly, the onlooker saw it begin slowly and relentlessly to eat itself. Madame Olympia waited till the dripping jaws hung in the air. Then she the jaws vanished, and she turned to the judges and gave a bow. The symphony of death is completed, said Madame Olympia, and
Man, that is evil. That is.
I mean, she got to win, right? I mean, like, how can she not win like that?
Right?
I mean,
Yeah, that wins.
I mean,
that
she
wins.
has to win. I mean,
Yeah.
besides the cheating, she got to win. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want her to win. I'm not saying
But,
she should win.
But that is the
I'm
darkest.
just saying
That's the darkest. Yeah, that's definitely
the
the darkest.
darkest I could think of. I can't think of nothing
there you
darker.
go.
Yeah.
So,
that one did me in.
I'm sorry. I'm gonna have to watch like 2 Disney movies tonight.
Oh,
I
for
cannot.
real. That is just.
I
Oh my
can't.
God. Oh my
I
God.
can't.
Oh
That
my
was